Taking over your radio.
Mike Schaefer.
See, I would argue, because I like to argue.
We all underestimated how hard it is to, one, win college football games, and two, transition and take over a program.
Mike Schaefer.
I was trying to kindly tell Mr. Bishop the Vikings have a chance to surprise some people, and I think that they could even win the division.
Mike Schaefer.
It doesn't seem like the kind of book where they would be hooked on meth. That got dark.
Mike Schaefer.
All right, first thing I want to say right now is if anyone gets on us because we can see 1/3 of an NFL game behind Schaefer's head and about 40% of an NFL game behind Matt's head, that we are not illegally streaming NFL football right now.
So I put my head so it is most in the
and zoom it into your face, Shafe.
You're fine.
There you go. Perfect.
By the way, Shafe, you've decided to go with the really short hair like I have. You cut the locks.
You know, I've wanted to do it for a while, but I was always in this like stretch of like, oh, engagement photos are coming up, or things like that. And then we got to early November, and it was very obvious to me that I wasn't going to be going back for Thanksgiving, that there was no like photo opportunities or anything going on. And it just went. It was much, much shorter like 3 weeks ago than it is right now. And I think I'm going to just continue to do this until I have to have wedding hair sometime next July. So I think this is just kind of the new plan.
You couldn't have short wedding hair?
I mean, I could. I don't know if I want it this short. Like, I'm balding bad. Like Bruce Willis style, I'm going to get the horseshoe. Like you can, if you really, for all 6 viewers, you want to see what's going on there. It's not great. So,
Bob?
I don't know. It's not also great when your fiance tells you shouldn't do it because it might not grow back. And so then you decide that you have to do it anyways to prove her wrong. But then it's been 3 weeks and your hair still looks like this. So, I don't know.
It's like the Seinfeld episode where Elaine is dating that guy who's just been shaving his head for a while. And then she's like, oh, she sees his photo. Can you grow it back? And then he tries to grow it back and it can't grow back anymore.
Yeah, it might just be gone.
By the way, my wife
start this, right?
My wife and I had the same conversation with our dog. Well, if I cut his hair, it might not grow back. I said, come on, it's a dog. Of course his hair is going to grow back.
Bark, bark.
And Gio's hair has grown back many times. Yeah, he's not making noise right now. By the way, 12-7 now, Pittsburgh over Baltimore. If you can't read the score bug behind Shafe's head, 12-7. But the Ravens are driving.
Did RG3 just get hurt? Is that what's going on?
Yes, he's hobbled a little. He pulled up late.
Target commercial, Josh.
What was that?
It's Target.
It's a Target commercial. He was saying it's a Target commercial. Okay, we just had a conversation regarding something that Barry Switzer said. I'm curious what you think because
Barry Switzer, what decade is this?
Oh, it's 2020. Why not talk to Barry Switzer? But he was talking about the advantage that Nebraska had back in the day, and he's talking 70s and 80s, and that Oklahoma would get players on the field fast, but Nebraska would develop players over time. And so they would have old rosters. They would have like older starting lineups, older rosters. And it reminded me of something Frost said earlier this week about just the general patience of kids. If they don't get their playing time, they want to go somewhere else. And that's just another one of those things that Nebraska used to do. Granted, it's been 40 years now that worked then, but really can't work as well now. Do you think there's any opportunity if Nebraska, wanted that veteran, that older roster? Is there enough patience out there to build a program that way?
Well, I mean, you see it at other places. That's kind of the model that Wisconsin seems to use, where it's just sort of you get 3 years in the program, and by your 4th year, you're a redshirt junior, and it's ready to go. Like, it's your job if you've earned it. If it's not, they'll move on. If you're an exceptional talent, you'll take someone else's job. I think that's what Nebraska, and I think that's what every program wants to do. But I think there also comes to be a time where you have to realize if the talent is better than what you're currently putting out there, you have to weigh the risks of what they don't know versus, what might hinder you from an athletic standpoint. It's difficult. And I don't think it's as easy as it was in the 70s and 80s because you had a freshman team. You had other places for these guys to at least play. And I don't think that exists anymore. And we're also talking about a team where, 2018, your shiny new toy is true freshman Adrian Martinez. 2019, your shiny new toy is new freshman Wandale Robinson. Let's not pretend like Nebraska hasn't played freshmen before and they haven't found an opportunity or had some success with it. So I think you can do a mixed build. I definitely think your offensive line and your defensive line, places where guys have to physically build themselves up to play in the rough and tumble Big Ten, that's going to take a little bit more time than, a wide receiver or running back. But the difficulty that all of these freshmen in 2020 are facing is that they didn't, even if they enrolled early, they didn't get spring ball. They didn't really have an off-season summer. They didn't have the bridge program or all of that. I mean, it was kind of, late July, early August for some of these guys when they really sort of would have dove in on some of this. You can do it away from the team, but it's not quite the same as what a normal year would have presented itself. So I do think that for all the hand-wringing about not playing some of the freshman players, there at least has to be some acknowledgement that some of these guys are only like 10 weeks into an actual college career. It's hard to expect that they would be in the same spot if this was a normal 2020.
Yeah, so Shafe, along those lines, the number of players that we have seen leave and like leave before their first year is even up. I guess I'm curious as to how much of it do you think is an identification issue that the coaches have had, maybe personality-wise, versus how much of it is this is a strange year. Like the things that you get, the rewards that you get as an athlete for the University of Nebraska, a lot of those aren't there right now, whether it's playing in front of thousands of people, being able to go out and have fun with friends. Like, I guess, how do you balance each of those things when you see these players leaving before their freshman campaign is done?
Well, I think there has to be a frank and honest conversation about some of this. There's a reason that Nebraska is able to go get Marcus Fleming in December. There's a reason, there's a reason that some of these guys are available, and that whether we want to call it concerns about production, concerns about size, concerns about how quickly they can assimilate to college, concerns about their academics. Like when Nebraska goes into Miami and they pull some top kids and it's at the end of a cycle, there's a reason that happens. Like it's just, we have to at least acknowledge that there's a greater chance that it's not going to work out in that scenario than if Nebraska gets that commitment in January of the previous year and they hang on to that commitment and they've built that relationship and that kid knows everything about every coach that he's going to go play for. And he's been to Nebraska 5 times. Like it's a difference. They came up for the Wisconsin game. Marcus Fleming and Jaden Francois were here for the Wisconsin game. And then they came back and they enrolled Jaden Francois in the winter, Marcus Fleming in the summer, and they did it in the year of a pandemic. There's so many different things that play into it. But it is at least worth acknowledging Keyshawn Green, Jaden Francois, Marcus Fleming, those guys all came to Nebraska one time from Miami. They did it at the end of a recruiting cycle. It's just not the same as, if you're able to build the Thomas Fedoni-like relationship or the Randolph Kapai-like relationship.
Yeah.
That they've been able to do in some of these other situations. I'm not saying that it's always, it's not always going to be bad. You look at someone like Cam Taylor-Britt, they didn't have a great relationship with him, and they got him to sign on signing day in 2018. But it turned out to be a really good fit. And it's just, we have to at least acknowledge that there's a reason Nebraska ends up on these boards of these players late in the cycle. And yes, they're very talented, but there's always a sort of an if or a but or something else there that we have to at least consider. Now, for all of these guys to leave at one time, that's rare. There's clearly a disconnect and an unhappiness, and I don't know if it's COVID related. I don't know if it's team related. I don't know if it's playing time related. I'm sure all of it's a little bit different. But if you're in Nebraska, there's nothing you can do. I mean, you have to continue to recruit. You have to continue to evaluate. You have to continue to take the players that you think give you the best chance. You have to take risks like Marcus Fleming. You have to take risks like Jaden Francois and Keyshawn Green. I mean, there's a reason those guys are athletically gifted and have had nice high school seasons and have the offers that they do. You have to have risks. They're not always going to work out. But when they do, it could give you a leg up at a key position. So I don't think Nebraska really needs to change a ton. I don't think they have to radically give up the southern half of Florida and never recruit it again. I just think that they have to continue to try to build the best relationships they can, make the best evaluations that they can about fit, and go forward. And sometimes it's going to work and sometimes it's not. I don't think there's any other way about it. It's such an inexact thing.
Yeah.
It's like trying to determine if you can have the greatest draft pick in the NFL draft. There's a lot of other factors that work for and against you.
Well, I appreciate what you're saying. I guess the issue right now is it seems as if here we are 3 years in and we're still having conversations about culture. We're still having conversations about things that you would think would have been well established a while ago. And Nebraska's they're not winning. They're not winning. But how much of the not winning is happening because, they're not bringing all the right personalities into the room at the same time. And this is not a knock on a Marcus Fleming or any of the guys that you mentioned. They just may have not fit here. But at this point, I understand wanting to take a chance on a highly athletic, skilled player, but if it's not going to fit the kind of culture that you're trying to establish with the ones you have here, doesn't that stunt your growth?
I mean, I guess that it could, but I don't look at Nebraska's inability to win simply because some of these guys leave in the transfer portal. I mean, Marcus Fleming and Jaden Francois and Keyshawn Green, and none of that has to do with why you're kicking off the ball to the 30-yard line and giving up field position issues. None of it has to do with some of the turnovers and some of the other on the field. I mean, we spend way more time than we should talking about a culture that none of us are ever around. We assume that the culture isn't good because the head man says it isn't good. But if the record was reversed and it was the same people, we'd hear about how they have a great winning culture. Culture is born out of winning football games sometimes. Culture is born out of, those types of things. And so I get kind of tired, and I didn't want to have this conversation this year. I don't want to talk about culture because that's the job of the coaches, to put them in the position to win games, and then they can talk about the great winning culture that they've established. It just feels like people talk about the excuses the coaching staff uses. This feels like one of the bigger ones to me. No one cares about your culture anymore. You've either built it now in the third year, or we're going to have to hear about it next year when they aren't winning football games again. At what point do we no longer have to hear about culture? They're your players. They're your team. They're your mistakes. It's your game. Go win it, go lose it, whatever. Don't talk about culture. Nobody needs to hear about culture anymore.
I don't want to make it sound like I'm making the same excuses, but I go back to our hits, misses, and guys bit that we do every year, and Nebraska's continual failures with its top-rated recruits are the most glaring thing that we've ever discovered through this exercise. So this isn't just a Scott Frost issue. This dates back to Bo, and it dates back to Riley, and now it's it's encompassing Scott Frost. And I guess that's the part that concerns me is, are you bringing in the right types of guys? And then if you feel like you're forced to play them, is that creating enough rifts on your team where you're not either playing the guys who are really bought in or that's stunting the development of those guys who are really brought in?
Well, look, it comes back to all you can do is evaluate and try to make the decisions that you think are going to be best for your football team. The fact that this has been a continual issue speaks again to the idea that the players that rank the best in the recruiting class for Nebraska sometimes, there's a reason that other teams don't take them out of very popular recruiting areas. There's a reason that there's a reason Tyjon Lindsey ends up at Nebraska. Granted, he was going to go to Ohio State, but I think that we sometimes overthink it a little bit too. And I just went on that rant about culture. A lot of this just comes to if you're focused on recruiting the right players, why isn't the focus also doing the right job? What are you inherently not doing that is seeding these guys with the culture that is winning? What are you not doing as a coaching staff to pass down the winning culture that Barrett Ruud and that Scott Frost and Ryan Held and these guys had, the winning culture that you had at UCF? Like, if it always comes down to finding the right guys, then shouldn't that be easier? Like, it doesn't make sense. There's this disconnect. If it's finding the right guys and you inherently know what the right guys are, because that's the other part of the statement. It presupposes that you know what the right guys are. Then why haven't you been recruiting them? It doesn't work that way. They have to get here and they have to teach them. And they have to develop them. And they have to provide them with this culture that they claim is either there or not there, depending on which day of the week it is. And so that is on the staff. Like, I just think that we make so much of stuff that we don't get to see. I don't know why it didn't work for Marcus Fleming or any of these guys, but I don't want to write them off entirely that it was any of their fault. And I don't think any of you guys want to either.
Well, no, and see, that's I guess to me that this whole thing, it all comes back to coaching. All of it does. I'm not blaming Marcus Fleming. I'm not blaming any of the players. It all comes back to coaching. Either you're not identifying the right types of personalities that need to be here or the right types of talent to be here. All of that falls back on the coach. And so I think we're in agreement, but I understand what you're saying because there is a point where, it's easier to blame the people that are gone versus the ones that are still here.
Well, so here's the question. Is Scott Frost, is his coaching staff building the right culture? If we're going to have the culture conversation, are they building the right culture? And how do we know? Because right now that culture isn't getting it done on the field.
Right.
It's lackadaisical play at key situations. It's penalties when you can't afford them. It's poor play when you have to make a play. I mean, so is it come down to identifying it before the kid even arrives there? Or is it building it when the kid is there? Like, if we're going to have the culture conversation, we can't discount the fact that they haven't done their job or haven't held their end of the bargain in providing the culture that allows these kids to flourish.
So, Shafe, along those lines, you mentioned it a little bit earlier, and I know you mentioned it on the podcast after the game. Like, special teams and hidden yards, it's no longer hidden anymore. It's so, out in the open.
You're getting punched in the face by these yards every damn game.
Yeah, exactly. What in the world is going on, in your opinion, with special teams? Because there is a strategy, and I guess, confused as to exactly what that strategy is.
Well, I get it. If you don't have a guy that can send it through the end zone and you don't trust your coverage unit, I understand the pooch kick. What I don't understand is you did it all game, and then the one time you don't give it or you don't do it, the guy gets to the 40. So, and they did this, previously. They did it at Wisconsin or somebody where they weren't kicking it to him, and then Barrett Pickering's like, you know what? This time it's gonna work. Boom, touchdown. That doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense that continually your punter, who has a pretty big leg, I got to give Will Pristup some credit. I mean, he can boot the ball. He puts more air and puts it deeper than the Vikings punter does every Sunday. I've noticed that. The problem is their coverage unit isn't athletic enough to get down the field in a timely manner. They don't get enough of them to get down the field in a timely manner, or Pristup out kicks them by a significant 15 yards. Which then gives you that beautiful TV shot when you watch the punt returner get it, and there's 2 Nebraska players for the 3 Iowa guys, and you just kind of do the math. And I'm not like a real great math person, but when you have a little bit of an advantage, and when most of the screen is green on the far side of the field, not a great sign. So it's little inconsistencies with strategy and execution on special teams that are just mind-blowingly bad. I mean, I don't understand how this happens at the frequency that it does. And it's not like they haven't tried to address it. I mean, Jonathan Rutledge, right? I mean, he came over from Auburn, and they've had some good special teams games. Like, they played pretty well against, Ohio State. I think they had a decent special teams game against Penn State. It's just like when it doesn't work, it's just not just sort of okay. It's just in Nebraska, whenever something doesn't work, it has to just be the worst version of itself. Like, that's just sort of the way that this season has played out. It's Groundhog's Day all the time around here. Like, that's basically what it's like. Every time Nebraska lines up to play football, it is Groundhog's Day. You see the same dumb things repeatedly when it's not working. When it goes well, it's like, whoa, what is this? This is crazy. I can't explain it. It's just bizarre.
And meanwhile, lurking in the weeds quietly is this long-awaited chess match between the man who maybe became the face of Nebraska's last failure versus the man who would be its savior. And we already know how some people are, and listen, some might actually be doubting some of Frost's abilities. How bad could things get around here if the guy who used to be the face of failure conquered the guy who was supposed to be the savior? Are we ready for this conversation?
I mean, I think it's putting a lot on the 1 year that Bob Diaco was here. It is sort of amazing the vitriol that a guy can have when he's spent one season there. And I mean, they were terrible, like real bad. You're not going to find a whole lot of defenses worse than 2017 Nebraska. You're not going to find players outwardly talking about just the utter confusion sewed into the game plan that they would spend all week practicing for one specific thing, and then on Saturday it would never get called and they'd be asked to do something entirely different. If that's what's happening at Purdue right now, Nebraska has an okay chance for success. But in 2017, especially towards the end, it wasn't great. So we'll see. I think that Nebraska has a fair chance of winning on Saturday. They played essentially 5 games, essentially 5 games. They played 5 games.
They literally have played 5 games.
They got a drop. That's the sort of intelligence that you invite on your show weekly. 3:45 on essentially 5 games. So they've had 2 close games that they've lost. They've had a close game that they've won. They've been blown out twice. I think, and I said this before the Iowa game, it felt like the Illinois one was more of an aberration. I expect this to be a close game. I expect it to be a 1-possession game. I don't know which team is going to be leading at the very end here. It could go. This is as true of a toss-up as Nebraska, I think, has played this season. I don't know if Nebraska can score enough points again. Like, it just comes down to that. And I think their defense is comfortably going to hold Purdue to around 23 points. The question is, can Nebraska score more than 20? And I don't think that the answer is a guaranteed yes. And it's not a great Purdue defense. And I don't even think that Karlaftis is going to be available for them. The best player on that Purdue defense. But I just, they have Rondale Moore, they have David Bell. Those guys can attack Nebraska. If one team was trailing and you were going to bet on the team to come back in the fourth quarter, it would be the 2 dudes, David Bell and Rondale Moore. And, we saw it last year when Aiden O'Connell led the game-winning drive. I mean, it's not like the quarterback has to be some star to make it happen. So I again worry that Nebraska's offense won't be enough. And the one game they won this year, they had to get a defensive touchdown. It feels like they're going to have to score in some sort of like odd fashion to pull this one off.
Hey, Shay, before I let you go, any idea on what I don't think I've asked you this about bowl games this year, whether it's, Nebraska has qualified for a bowl game because everyone is qualified. Like, are you expecting a lot of bowl games? I ask people that like every couple of weeks just because we see more canceled by the day.
Well, and I think we've seen several that have affiliation with the Big Ten canceled, and so that cuts down. It seems like the affiliation is going to be really sort of the key element to all of this, that you're not just going to get, a random bowl just taking a random team because it's wide open out there. I think that the affiliations are what's going to dictate that, and the more of these lower tier Big Ten bowl games go by the wayside. And I know that some people, Brunts particularly, think that I troll him with this. But the Pinstripe Bowl would have probably looked at a team like Nebraska if they win their next 2 games or 3 and 4. Like, that's a team that they would want to put in New York City. I knew that last year if they beat Iowa, Nebraska was getting a first-class ticket to go to Yankee Stadium. Like, that bowl and the people over there very much want to take a brand and put it inside their stadium. That game isn't happening. The Quick Lane game isn't happening. So I think the options for a school like Nebraska dwindle a little bit, especially when you only have 1 win right now. And you've got a host of teams, there's going to be a Penn State and a Michigan that have a similar record. It'll be interesting if these games do get played. And I'm kind of skeptical that a lot of them will, outside of your New Year's games and your playoff. I don't know how many Big Ten teams are actually going to get chosen, outside of, the Ohio States and Northwesterns and Wisconsins, maybe Iowa. A team like Iowa could be a danger of being left out of a bowl game in a year where they might run the table and go 6-2, run the table after they started 0-2. So it's kind of an interesting time to see how that plays out, and if there's that much interest in these bowl games to even happen.
I believe I just did a quick count. I believe there are 31 bowl games still online, not counting playoff games. So that would be 62 slots if my math is correct.
Could there be exhibition games, Shafe? Like, could they allow Nebraska to play like a random non-conference game?
Someone's going to allow Nebraska's football team is going to be allowed to play football? I thought I said something dumb with essentially played 5 games. Idiot over here thinking the football team's going to be allowed to play football.
Hey, if they are, I'm going to throw this conversation back in your face, man.
All right, you do that. We're going to check with Ralph Russo before we know whether the football team's allowed to play.
Mike Schaefer, Husker 24/7. All right, Shafe, get back to this exciting game. I mean,
Did you see what happened at the end of the first half? The Ravens could have spiked the ball on 3rd down and kicked a field goal and made it a 2-point game. They went for a touchdown. The guy dropped it in the end zone, so now the Steelers are still up 5.
This feels like the most Wednesday football game of all time.
It's like a bowl game, like a random Wednesday. It's
Actually,
like
I was going to say it feels like what Thursday night football used to feel like.
Oh, yeah. Before it
I
was
think
fun.
Thursday night football games are good now.
They are good, but I'm saying used to.
I think teams have figured out how to like practice. They've kind of gotten themselves into good spots. But normally, like, I'm excited to watch any NFL game whenever it happens. But these teams, just the way it started, and you're just like, oh, this is going to be one of those games. I mean, that's essentially what it was.
Yeah.
And it is one of those games. All right, Shafe, have a good one. Thanks.
All right,
Bye, Shafe.
Mike Schaefer of Husker 24/7. All right, take a break, come back, and we have more coming up, including dumb debates. Got some good dumb debates today, and maybe Stibbs will join us. I don't know.
Maybe.
I sent the invitation. He still hasn't responded.
Yeah. Well, we'll have to ask him.
I guess we'll see. All right, we're coming back with more in a moment. It's Unsportsmanlike Conduct on 1620 The Zone.